Good afternoon. This is the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the date today is January 29th, 2025. We have three items on our agenda. The first is a presentation from an analysis from the Center of the American Experiment, Mr. Dave Zimmer. Mr. Zimmer, would you approach the testifying table? Perhaps a word of identity and a little of your past, and then you can proceed with your presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Chair and committee members. I'm David Zimmer with Center of the American Experiment. I serve as the Public Safety Policy Fellow following a 33-year career in law enforcement with the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. I'm here to share with you recent research I completed comparing offender outcomes of black and white serious offenders in Minnesota. The report is an important one because it stands as one of the few projects which disputes the narrative that Minnesota's criminal justice system is creating racial disparities in outcomes. I hope we can all agree that it's impossible to fix a problem if we are unable to acknowledge the problem exists. And I want to address something up front. My presentation today deals with race, and in 2025, that can be a sensitive issue to discuss. I want to assure you that I come at this work respectfully and with a purpose to improve the lives of Black Minnesotans by exposing the damaging narratives that perpetuate the massive disproportion in criminal victimization by Black Minnesotans. I'll break this presentation into four parts. First, I'll share the rationale for the report. Second, I'll share the methodology used and some of the limitations in the report. Third, I'll review the data and the findings, and fourth, I'll open it up for questions. I've already introduced myself, so I would just add that I submit that my broad range of criminal justice experience spanning the past 4 decades establishes my credibility to evaluate the data and draw the conclusions presented in my report. So what was the rationale for conducting this research and writing the report? From my experience, Minnesota's criminal justice system is obsessed with race, and that obsession has resulted in misguided criminal justice system policy development that often fails to hold Black offenders accountable, thereby subjecting Black communities to disproportionately high levels of crime. The persistent refrain involving race in Minnesota's criminal justice system is that Black Minnesotans are overrepresented throughout the criminal justice system compared to their proportion in the general population. For example, Black adults represent just 7% of Minnesota's population, yet they represent 35% of Minnesota's prison population. The conclusion often drawn is that this represents a disparity created by the system. The House just heard that very argument last month when the DOC commissioner reported to them that the Minnesota Department of Corrections has notable racial disparities in its prison population, implying that Black Minnesotans are treated disparately within the criminal justice system for no other reason but race. But that conclusion ignores the disproportionate level of offending that occurs outside the criminal justice system and other important factors which I'll address later. An important point that I hope that you take away from my report lies in understanding the use of the terms disproportion and disparity, using them correctly. Disproportion is simply a difference in numbers. Disparity describes an unfair difference. It is undeniable that there is a disproportionate number of Black Minnesotans in our criminal justice system. But these disproportions do not represent disparities created by an unjust system. This is an area of criminology getting dutiful attention. Professor Peter Moskos of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice recently noted that academia's use of the general population in determining disparities in criminal outcomes is disingenuous at best. Moskos said, "Disparity is not bias, and police activity will and should reflect racial disproportion in criminal offending. An honest denominator is needed." That honest denominator is the number of criminal offenders by race, not our general population by race. In my 33-year career in law enforcement, I can say without hesitation, I never witnessed an act or participated in a project that targeted criminals based on race. What I did witness was a criminal justice system that went out of its way to self-correct a problem that it had accepted as a truth, that being that the system was creating racial disparities. Let me give you a few examples. I witnessed the formation of top 10 lists that had to be, for wanted criminals, that had to be compiled to ensure that there was a broad racial makeup of that list, as opposed to a list that focused on who were the worst criminals, who were the dangers to the community. I witnessed the creation of sign and release arrest warrants, which were designed specifically to reduce the number of Black defendants arrested for failing to appear in court. I witnessed the reduction of drug testing for conditional release defendants because a large proportion of Black defendants were testing positive and having their conditional release revoked. We've all seen the creation of racial impact tools used to guide our Sentencing Guideline Commission when determining penalties for new or revised laws. And finally, even this body, our Minnesota legislature, where we saw the introduction just last year of a bill in the House that sought to decrease penalties for being a felon in possession of a firearm, specifically because there was a disproportionate number of Black felons who were offending and being arrested for that crime. These and countless other examples represent an obsession in our criminal justice system to ensure racial proportionality within the system is consistent with racial proportionality outside the system, when what is needed is a racial proportionality in the system that is consistent with the racial proportionality of who's committing crime, the offenders. Sadly, this obsession is to eliminate racial disproportions within the system has served to harm the very people policymakers often claim to be helping, Black Minnesotans. Efforts that eliminate or reduce consequences for crime in the Black community are directly responsible for creating and perpetuating the disproportionately high levels of crime and victimization in that very community. Historically, evaluations of systemic racism in the criminal justice system started and ended by comparing the racial makeup of our prison population to the racial makeup of the general population, and then drawing the conclusion that we have a disparity. More recent studies have attempted to evaluate the system by using arrest data or charging data, but these data sources are imperfect and incomplete. Fortunately, in 2021, our Minnesota BCA began reporting offender data by race. For the first time, we can now see the makeup of our criminal offenders using information coming from victims, witnesses, 911 callers, the police, and others. This allows for a more complete and accurate data set to focus the evaluation on who is entering the system rather than using our general population as that denominator. We can then follow that group of offenders as it travels through the system to determine whether disparities are actually being created. I want to talk about a few limitations of my report. The report analyzes a single year, 2022, though it does build off a similar report and findings I completed using 2021 data. The new data set, offender data by race, allows for updates going forward, and I encourage everyone to use that data, which I have used in these two reports. Other limitations include the comparison is limited to Black versus white adult offenders, as this is the primary comparison made in Minnesota. It also focuses on serious crimes likely to result in prison, not traffic stops and other low-level crime. The data is largely an analysis of aggregate data, meaning it doesn't follow individuals through the system, but rather groups: murderers, arrested murderers, charged murderers, etc. However, a significant section in my report does analyze case-specific data surrounding sentencing. This data comes from a time of civil unrest and a time that our nation was dealing with the effects of a pandemic, both of which arguably could have created an impact in the data. Future updates will help sort this out. And then one last point on the methodology before we get into the data. There are countless ways to report data: percentages, ratios, rates, etc. I chose to consistently report the data using a ratio, Black to white, based on the rate within each race. So let's look at the data. As I've mentioned several times, it's undeniable that there are disproportionate numbers of Black Minnesotans in our criminal justice system. This is not due to a systemically racist system, but rather because evidence shows that Black Minnesotans commit a disproportionate number of crimes, especially serious crimes likely to lead to prison. The data is overwhelming. Let's take a look at the differences in offender rates between Black and white Minnesotans. This is the only chart, by the way, that deals with a per capita data. In subsequent comparisons, I then use that per capita data for a per offender calculation. Again, that honest denominator that we talked about. The data shows that Black Minnesotans commit serious crime defined as murder, assault, robbery, weapons, drug, and sexual assault at a rate 11 times higher than that of white Minnesotans. The disproportions become even more pronounced with the seriousness of crime. For example, on a per capita basis, Black Minnesotans are 16 times more likely to commit an assault, 33 times more likely to commit a murder, and an astounding 84 times more likely to commit a robbery than a white Minnesotan. Given the massive disproportion in offending, let's examine how those disproportionate groups of offenders are treated once they're in the system. It would stand to reason that if the system was systemically flawed and racist, we would see these disproportions increase, thereby producing disparities. The data blows that assumption apart. What we find is that at nearly every stage of a case, the outcomes are actually more favorable for Black offenders than white offenders. So let's start with arrest data, the first stage in the criminal justice system. Despite massive disproportions in criminal offending, the data shows clearly that there is a disproportionate number of white offenders who are arrested for serious offenses. Again, if there were disparities disfavoring Black offenders, we would see the ratio for Black arrests worsen from the ratio of Black offending. And what we see is the opposite. For serious crime offenses, white offenders were arrested at a rate 1.5 times greater than Black offenders. The one outlier here is for weapon offenses, where the disproportion of Black arrests seems to clearly coincide with the disproportionate level of gun violence in our Black communities and the logical police response that follows. The next step in the criminal justice system is the charging decision made by our prosecutors after police make an arrest or submit a case. For all serious crimes analyzed, white offenders were charged at a rate 1.7 times greater than that of Black offenders. The data shows again that once in the criminal justice system, disproportions didn't worsen for Black offenders, they favored Black offenders. A positive takeaway is that there's consistency between the ratios of arrests and charges. The next step in the process is sentencing, and the pattern observed in previous areas is repeated here. Of all the serious offenses I analyzed, white serious offenders received a felony sentence at a rate 2.2 times greater than Black serious offenders. An area I'd like to highlight here is drug-related felony sentences. How often have you heard the narrative that Black Minnesotans are unfairly burdened by our drug laws? The analysis shows that white drug offenders received a felony sentence at a rate 2.5 times greater than that of Black drug offenders. Another area I analyzed was the difference between presumptive prison rate and the actual prison commitment rate. I found that white serious offenders were 1.18 times more likely than Black serious offenders to receive a sentence defined by the sentencing guidelines as a presumptive commitment. Then, in a remarkably consistent way, I found that white serious offenders were also 1.18 times more likely than Black serious offenders to receive an actual prison commitment. This shows that our state court judges did not favor white offenders or disfavor Black offenders at the time of sentencing. The rate of white and Black serious offenders receiving a presumptive prison commitment remained consistent with the rates of those offenders who received actual prison commitments. This chart reflects the analysis of offenders in an aggregate manner. The next slide reflects the analysis of actual defendants, so case-specific data that I received from the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. I analyzed the downward sentencing departures for all these serious crimes. And to do this, I analyzed serious crime defendants receiving sentencing departures and found that of all the serious crime defendants who received a presumptive commitment to prison, white serious crime defendants were 1.19 times more likely to have received a mitigated or downward dispositional departure, meaning probation rather than prison, while Black serious crime defendants were 1.7 times more likely to receive a mitigated durational departure, meaning a shorter length of sentence. This may be evidence of a self-correction on the part of judges who attempt to correct imbalances that they perceive, again, because of the narrative. After an in-depth analysis of serious crime defendants, I found that Black serious crime defendants who were found guilty and received a felony sentence were 1.8 times more likely to receive a prison commitment, and that their prison sentences were on average 10.2 months longer than that of white serious crime defendants. The important question here was to answer why and was it justified? The answer is that Black serious crime defendants exceeded their white counterparts in 3 critical sentencing criteria. 1, the average severity level of the offense committed. 2, the average criminal history score. And 3, the frequency in which Black offenders used or possessed a dangerous weapon during the commission of their crime. Any one of these criteria alone would be more than to account for the tipping of the scale from a presumptive stay to a presumptive commitment. And any one of them would be enough to account for a 10-month difference in sentencing. And Black serious felony defendants exceeded white serious felony defendants in all 3 categories. I encourage you to watch the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission as they conduct a comprehensive review this year, because they have noted these sentencing criteria are leading to more certain and longer sentences for Black serious offenders. And some of the members of the commission have opined that these criteria need to be adjusted to reduce the outcomes noted. Again, the narrative at work in our policy development. This chart illustrates a comparison between, it's a side-by-side comparison comparing the rate of all serious criminal offenders versus the rate of all state prison inmates. And again, this is on a per capita basis. If the criminal justice system was systemically racist, one would expect to see the ratios between offenders and inmates worsen for Black Minnesotans. Instead, the ratio improves. Now, an 8.5 to 1 per capita Black prisoner ratio is without a doubt something we should all be concerned with. But this analysis demonstrates these disproportions are not the result of a systemically racist criminal justice system unfairly treating Black offenders. Rather, they are the result of a system that is rightfully setting reasonable responses and consequences for offending, intending for them to be enforced consistently, irrespective of race. Societal efforts to address the root causes of this disproportionate offense rate in the Black community will only be enhanced by, not hampered by, a consequential criminal justice system. When all is said and done, who pays the price for an inconsequential criminal justice system? The victims. And my analysis demonstrated that Black Minnesotans were 5.5 times more likely to be victimized by a serious offender than white Minnesotans. Efforts to reduce consequences for Black serious crime offenders will only continue to saddle Black Minnesotans with continued disproportionate levels of victimization. In summary, Black Minnesotans are overrepresented in our criminal justice system compared to the proportion they represent in our general population. But this is a disingenuous comparison, and the outcome does not reflect disparities created by our criminal justice system. Rather, it reflects grossly disproportionate rates of criminal offending in the Black community. Failing to apply consistent consequences to these disproportionate offender rates will only perpetuate the devastating victimization rates facing our Black communities. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Are there any questions? Sir Howell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Zimmer, are you aware of any comparable studies that have looked at this in the past?
No, the data set that I used, the offender data, offender data by race has only been available since 2021. And to my knowledge, I've not seen any other research projects using that data set. In addition, you won't find many projects that follow a group, follow so many avenues within our criminal justice system. I went from offenders outside the system all the way through to prison inmates. So it's a very comprehensive study.
We have about 10 minutes for allowing for questions. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Wimmer Verbatim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two questions. Has this report been peer reviewed, and could you share with us just your background in research and analyzing data sets?
Yep.
Mr. Zimmer.
It has been peer reviewed. Within the Center of American Experiment, we have two economists. They both are very knowledgeable and versed in dealing with data and writing reports themselves. Before this report was published, they each went through it line by line, went through my data, offered helpful suggestions. So it was peer reviewed by them. It was reviewed by our professional editing team, as well as the president of our organization. As far as my background, again, my professional background is in law enforcement, and for the past 3 years, I have been serving as a policy fellow, really rolling my sleeves up and digging into data for the first time in my career.
Any other questions? Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zimmer, you spoke about some of the data that on its face seemed to support the notion that there were actual disparities in outcomes disfavoring Black defendants. Can you explain again how you determined that those outcomes were actually justified?
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go back to the slide that really covers that. So as I was analyzing the data, one of the things I noted was this average 10 months longer prison sentence for Black serious crime defendants, as well as 1.8 times more likely to receive a prison commitment. And that jumped out at me as, whoa, here's possibly a disparity that we hear about. So I wanted to dig into more of the data behind those sentences. And what I found are the 3 boxes below. On average, those Black serious crime defendants had a severity level of their offense that was a full 1.2 points higher on average. They had a criminal history score 0.37 points higher, and they were 3.7 times more likely to have used or possessed a dangerous weapon in commission of their crime. Any one of those criteria would account for more than a 10-month sentence increase, or bumping one from a presumptive stay to a presumptive commitment. These defendants had all 3.
Any other discussion? Oh, Senator Ladd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Zimmer. My understanding is that most crimes are never reported to law enforcement. How does your data set and analysis account for that?
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Senator. You are correct. I've recently written on some of those shortcomings of our data, but I'm using the data that everybody uses in analyzing crime, and that is reported crime. We can't get at the crimes that are not reported. So I'm using what's available, and it's what all researchers use.
Any other questions? Senator Ladd.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Zimmer, I suspect there are statistical methodologies available to account for unreported data. My understanding, the majority of all offenses go unreported. So your data set would necessarily be missing a large component in order to draw conclusions. My understanding also is, I think as you said in the opening, yours is the only or one of the few studies to have reached this conclusion, even though supposedly they're all working off the same data set. So Sounds like maybe all the other researchers that have been peer-reviewed and published in reputable journals must be using a different methodology or missing something that you are engaging in here. And another question that I had is you're using race data, but my understanding is that the third largest category of race in the race data reports is unknown. So how does your methodology account for that fact when you simply don't have race data reported for the crimes that you're evaluating?
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Senator. I don't believe that is accurate to say the majority of offenses are unknown race. Certainly in many crimes where the crime is determined after the fact, somebody comes home and their house is burglarized, there's going to be an unknown race of the offender. But in the crimes that are reported, person crimes and serious crimes that I analyzed, the unknown data set was not the majority. It was, that just isn't accurate.
Senator Ladd.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Zimmer, I don't think I said a majority. If I did, that was mistaken. I said the third largest category of race is listed as unknown race, which would be at least a non-trivial amount. I would think statistically it would be impactful on the methodology. So I would think there must be some way to figure out or to account for it, or else it's just a large gap in the data set, which would draw into question some of the conclusions that you have raised. Do you have any data on disparity in rates of reporting crimes between black communities and white communities?
Mr. Zimmer.
Senator, I do not, no.
And yet,
Senator Ladd.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Zimmer, your whole analysis is based on crimes that were reported, correct?
Mr. Zimmer.
That is the initial step in the analysis, yes, was determining who the offenders were based on victims, witnesses, 911 callers, and the like.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ladd.
So it seems to me another large gap in your data set here. If you're trying to, if your conclusion is that there's a disproportionate, or there isn't a disproportionate impact, you have to account for any differentials in rates of reporting the crimes, because it's the whole point of your conclusion, as I understand it, is that crime rates are disproportionate, and that accounts for the disproportionate results that we're seeing. But you're not starting with crime rates as a basis for your entire analysis. You're starting with reported crimes. So you're missing a whole step there. Am I not understanding that correctly?
Senator Ladd. Senator Ladd. I'm listening carefully, and I'm just putting in my mind a little comparison. I would agree, we're somewhat handicapped on knowing the full picture of what's going on in criminal activity, especially unreported crimes. We also get departments, agencies, sometimes the Judiciary branch coming, and they're recognizing data that might come even from the same data sets that we have. But couldn't we make that same argument that they too are presenting proposals to us, knowing full well that they are missing a huge amount of information, yet we still make proposals and we put them into law based on that same conclusion that they give us. So I have to sympathize with Mr. Zimmer and anyone else that comes to the committee. They're presenting facts, I can put those air quotes around it, and they too may have missing information simply because there is no information. And we've been making proposals into law for a long time from places like the DOC, sentencing guidelines, the Judiciary branch. Isn't that true?
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have at my fingertips, nor I think do you, the specific data or reports that we've received in previous decisions we've made as a committee or as a legislature to put into law. So I can't tell you, exactly what was in those data sets. But we do have in front of us a presentation that is drawing broad conclusions of population versus rates of crime being committed, which is centrally reliant upon an assumption that the rate of reported crime is the same between communities of color and communities that are white. And if that is not the case, then it calls into question the central conclusion of this report that we're being presented with. My understanding is that there is research, and I don't have citation, but I could get it. But there is research that has shown crimes committed by black suspects are more likely to be reported to the police, which would skew the entire data set that Mr. Zimmer has used. In other words, crimes committed by white suspects are underreported, so they wouldn't show up in the data that was analyzed to reach the conclusion Mr. Zimmer reached. So what I'm suggesting is that the conclusions are not valid based on that substantial flaw in the data. It's also curious to me that these conclusions are at odds with a whole body of research across states, agencies, peer-reviewed journals. I'm not a statistician. I'm not in a position to, dig into the data and analyze it in that level of detail. But this seems to be an outlier, and I'm trying to figure out why that is. And it seems to me there are some basic flaws in the data sets that might explain that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lance. Is there any other questions? Senator Kreun. And then this will have to be our last question because we've got other things to do in our committee.
Thank you.
Kreun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, this report is for what happens post-reported crimes, and I guess that's the report. And I think it's still valuable information, even if it doesn't include or unreported crimes. It's still good information to know. I guess it's important because it just seems like, a lot of the bills that, since I've been here the last 2 years that we've been passing in this area and other areas kind of starts with the assumption, from my perspective, that it's structural bias that is the cause of it. And I've not seen any of these other detailed reports that Senator Latz references. They might exist, I don't know, but I've not seen anybody come before this committee and present that to come to that conclusion. It just starts with that conclusion as an assumption. And so, and you talked about the difference between disproportion and disparity, and you kind of said in your report, disparity kind of had an unjustified connotation to it. And so I guess my question is, are you aware of any other studies in Minnesota, unreported crimes that gets beyond the disproportionality and gets to the heart of what you're trying to look at here, that maybe comes to a different conclusion that you could tell us about, and maybe what the differences are?
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Senator. If I understand your question, are there reports that counter what I'm saying? Oh, yeah. This is by far one of the few reports that you'll see that challenges that narrative that's out there in academia and within the criminal justice system, that there's really no difference in, crime rates and such, and that our system is treating people unfairly based on race. So
Mr. Chair, one follow-up.
Senator Kreun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess what I'm trying to say, well, first of all, my question was about Minnesota data specifically, not necessarily out of Minnesota or nationally. And if that's the case, then where I mean, obviously there's disproportionality. You're saying that, everybody's saying that, it's pretty obvious to everybody. So where would those reports be going wrong? Is it a different methodology? How do they come to different conclusions than what you're coming to? I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Senator. Historically, if you see any reports on the system, you will see the use of the general population as the denominator. And I'm arguing that that's a dishonest denominator. It just doesn't help focus the evaluation on who's committing the crime. The vast majority of both black and white Minnesotans are law-abiding. I 100% agree with you there. But it's important to parse out of each of those groups who's committing the crime, and then use that as your denominator in evaluating how the system is treating those people.
Mr. Zimmer, we're going to have to conclude this portion of our agenda. I want to thank you for sharing that information. What? Oh,
Hi,
Senator
Senator
Westland.
Limmer. I'm sorry, I'd actually had my hand up before.
I'm
You didn't
sorry.
see me. I will
Go
be
ahead.
very brief.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that just to bring some clarity to this, I believe Mr. Zimmer testified to this committee that his report is in fact the outlier amongst that this has never been replicated in any other prior report. I would note that the Center of the American Experiment is not a nonpartisan organization that does nonpartisan research. And I would note that the subtitle for this report is A Political Narrative at Odds with the Data, and I would say that that is actually the best way to encapsulate this report, that this is a political narrative that is in fact at odds with the data. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Zimmer, is the Center for American Experiment a C4 organization that would represent a political interest or a party?
Excuse me, say,
Is the Center for the American Experiment, as Senator Westland has suggested, is it a political organization?
Senator, no, we are not.
All right, thank you. This will conclude our discussion. Thank you, Mr. Zimmer, for coming in. We'll now have a presentation by the Minnesota Sheriff's Association. And I believe first up is Sheriff Jason Camerud from Carver County. Welcome to the committee. Sheriff Camerud, would you identify yourself for the record and then proceed with your report?
Good afternoon, Chair Limmer and Chair Latz and members of the committee. I'm Jason Camerud. I'm the sheriff in Carver County, just southwest of here a little bit. And today I am here to speak on behalf of the Minnesota Sheriff's Association. And I want to say how grateful I am to have an opportunity to come and visit with you today and to talk about the association's legislative priorities for this session. As many of you know, Minnesota Sheriff's Association formed in 1855 in an effort to support the elected sheriffs in the performance and discharge of their statutory duties. Our membership currently includes all 87 elected sheriffs, which collectively provides nonpartisan representation of all of Minnesota. Now, of course, each sheriff has their own unique circumstances, that impact the performance of their very duties and how they deliver that service. Yet regardless of where they are geographically or what their location is, we're all facing roughly the same or similar types of problems and challenges. A couple of things about sheriff's offices that I think are important to note that set us apart from other law enforcement is that while we provide uniform police services and functions, which is something that people note and were the most visible part of policing, but we also conduct criminal investigations. We maintain jails. We navigate complex civil process obligations. We provide for courtroom security, bailiff duties, prisoner transport functions. And then, of course, we have a wide array of other specialty functions that sheriffs do, ranging from SWAT, canine, UAV, mounted patrols, and recreational services, chaplains, just to name a few. One of the constants in each of our operations is that there is no shortage of challenges that require skills, expertise, and effort to overcome. MSA and each of the elected sheriffs recognize and embrace the relationship between challenges and opportunities, recognizing, of course, that those opportunities are really about an opportunity to improve our performance and build on our successes. MSA's primary means of supporting elected sheriffs and their team members is through providing training modules covering the various operational responsibilities. And by training modules, I am referring to classroom-type sessions. We have a very robust e-learning or online learning tool. And then, of course, MSA produces a fair amount of reference materials that provide insights unique to Sheriff's Office operations. Along the same line with the educational opportunities that MSA maintains, we provide annual scholarships to law enforcement students who are actively pursuing a career in law enforcement. And we're pretty proud of our scholarship program that we run. This year, 18 students received some supplemental academic funding. So in looking at this legislative session, MSA has some interests in several proposals. We're watching some others, but we specifically prioritized the following, and that's what brings me here today. Priority admissions, we often refer to this as the 48-hour law, and this is the requirement that we get people from who are civilly committed to the Commissioner of Human Services, that we get them from the jail into the Commissioner's care. Now, since 2008, there has been at least 6 legislative work groups examining the issues related to ensuring that the mentally ill, who are also in justice involved, receive the appropriate care and resources. In each time the task forces have looked at this, they have concluded that the glitch in the system is capacity. That's capacity in terms of number of beds, and that's capacity in terms of staffing to meet those needs. The 48-hour requirement to get the patient from the jail to an appropriate facility cannot be accomplished without substantial investment in increasing our statewide capacity. The intent behind the 48-hour requirement, of course, was to ensure the prioritization of treatment over criminalizing those with mental illness, with the belief that if we can effectively resolve the mental health things, why the criminality components will sort themselves out. The current situation in Minnesota does not adequately support that priority, however. Today, those who are justice system involved and who have been civilly committed by the court to the Commissioner of Human Services remain detained in county jails well after the 48-hour time frame has elapsed. And to get out past 1 year is not uncommon. And if you'll recall, for sentenced inmates, jails are 364 days or less. In my own jail, as we look at those who have been civilly committed, 3 to 5 months beyond the 48-hour requirement remains a pretty common time frame. And you might recall that there's a 1 to 3 month lag in there while they're going through the Rule 21 process as well. So their actual time while they're in the facility having mental health issues is greater than the 3 to 5 months that I'm seeing. Sheriff Empting in Clay County had a patient in his jail for 445 days after being civilly committed. Late last week, Sheriff Seidel in Brown County sent a letter to Commissioner Harpstead detailing the circumstances of a commitment patient who remained in jail for 139 days beyond the 48-hour requirement in 2022. And then again, 332 days beyond the 48-hour requirement in 2024. That's the same patient who we missed the opportunity to get that patient to the place where they could receive the care and resources that they needed. I want to be clear that these are not isolated, one-off, rare occurrences. These cases are just a few examples of systemic failures that are really reflective of what is the common, everyday, missed chance to ensure the mentally ill are getting the treatment they require, and in fact, in my estimation, deserve. So, county jails are simply not designed or staffed to meet the needs of those with mental illness. When we house the mentally ill in our jails, we're doing them a disservice by not providing the care and resources they need. But we're also doing a disservice to the other pretrial and convicted inmates who are in the jail who are attempting to navigate the criminal justice system themselves. And then, of course, let's not forget that we are exhausting our detention professionals who are committed to doing the absolute best job they can. And we're compelling them to perform a function that they're simply not prepared to accomplish. And so the MSA is supportive of any immediate efforts that increases the capacity for immediate secure treatment options for those who have been civilly committed to the Commissioner of Human Services. As we move on and look to our priorities, training funds, commonly called the Philando Castile Training Fund. It is my understanding that Governor Walz has not included the roughly $6 million in his most recent recommended budget. MSA certainly supports the legislature's efforts related to improving training requirements for our licensed peace officers. At the same time, we recognize that when there is a one-size-fits-all state-mandated approach to training requirements, the state has an obligation to fund it. And historically, the state has allocated adequate funding to ensure that its mandated training requirements were met. Each biennium, however, law enforcement has had to return to the legislature to request continued allocation of the funding to satisfy those training requirements. So MSA, in addition to seeking the funding, that we would further ask that those training funds be baked into the state's budget to ensure that those critical training pieces for peace officers in the key areas of public safety and community trust building remain viable. Many sheriffs utilize UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly called drones. MSA is recommending 3 updates to the statute related to UAV usage. First, as the legislation is relatively newish, and as we have rolled it out, we have found that there are some varied interpretations as we look to try to apply the law and utilize the tool. So MSA is looking for legislative clarity to ensure that law enforcement be allowed to utilize UAV technologies in time-sensitive missing person cases. Secondly, MSA is looking to amend the statute to allow UAV use with property owner consent as one of the exceptions to the search warrant requirement. And lastly, MSA is looking to expand the authorized emergency use to include preventing the imminent destruction of evidence, which would allow us to act swiftly to preserve critical information after an emergency. We think that these updates will improve our operational effectiveness while striking a balance with the privacy concerns of the public. Minnesota sheriffs issue the permits to carry throughout the state, and the association is encouraging an adjustment to the permit to carry statute to require notification to the sheriff upon a legal name change. The current statutory language requires the permit holder to update the records with the issuing agency when they have made a permanent address change or when they have lost or destroyed their permit to carry card. There is no requirement to notify the issuing agency when their name has changed. And so we're looking to have that incorporated into the statute. Sexual assault investigations within a Minnesota-owned military facility, Chapter 299C. Minnesota Sheriff's Association recommends adjustments to the statutes regulating the independent use of force investigative unit that was established within the BCA. We're looking to expand their investigative authority to include sex assault investigations involving U.S. Armed Forces personnel when the incident is alleged to have occurred on a Minnesota-owned military facilities. Current statute limits it to Minnesota National Guard personnel, and we're looking to have that expanded to include other soldiers who might come from other jurisdictions but train on a Minnesota-owned facility. Public safety radio replacement. The association is supportive of statewide funding to replace radios and equipment commonly connected to the Allied Radio Matrix and Emergency Responders System. Didn't know that's what the acronym was. It's always been the Armor System to me. And so the Armor System, though, is the backbone of public safety communications in Minnesota. Many of the radios have reached their end of life cycle and will no longer receive manufacturer support, which of course makes them vulnerable to failures and limits their effectiveness as a tool during critical incidents. We have a need to ensure reliable communications and consistent interoperability communications throughout the state as we start drawing on multi-jurisdictional resources to accomplish our mission, and maintaining this armor system is a critical piece of being able to do that. As we're in the hiring stage that we're in right now, one of the things that is critical for us as hiring managers is the ability to receive reliable and accurate information about employment history from candidates who are looking to come into our organizations. And we rely on that thorough employment background to hire qualified people, but also to protect the public safety, to ensure that only the most qualified are getting in our front door and providing that service. The MSA is looking to incorporate some language into the statute that would compel past and current employers to provide a prompt response to the hiring managers seeking that pre-employment data. Hiring managers, we really need to be able to move pretty quickly. More importantly, we need to be able to do it well, but we do need to be able to move quickly in hiring these law enforcement candidates. Unnecessary delays in the hiring process, like those created by past employers who fail to provide timely response to our solicitations for background data, jeopardize our abilities to get those people in the door, trained up, and out delivering the service. The proposed language offers three things. First, it specifically requires past employers and current employers to provide a response to our written request within 10 days. It streamlines the process for obtaining a court order, which of course prevents some unnecessary administrative burdens for the hiring manager. And then it expands the liability for willful violations on the part of the past or current employers who withhold the data. And we don't want to use this tool, but we're hopeful that it would deter employers from refusing to provide that background data. And we would encourage the legislature that if there are fees and fines and revenues generated from those civil fines or penalties, that that money be allocated to youth intervention program grants administered by the BCA. In closing, I have just one final thought as I wrap up my time today. While all the previously mentioned legislative proposals are really important to the MSA and to each of our sheriffs, the main message I want for you and your colleagues to hear from me today is that your local sheriff and the Minnesota Sheriff's Association is your partner in serving the needs of our mutual constituents. Your local sheriff and the MSA can serve as a tremendous resource available to help provide some perspective, share some insights as you're evaluating different proposals. And I think those are the sorts of things that, were I in your shoes, I would want to have that kind of insight and that kind of perspective to help me make a fully informed legislative decision when the time came. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for your leadership and your service to the people of Minnesota. It's not an easy gig, and I am grateful that we still have people who put their hand up and want to do it. And so thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time today, and I assure you that the MSA and each of your local sheriffs is looking forward to working collaboratively with you this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Is there any questions, comments for the sheriff? Senator Westland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I need longer arms. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And we are in an interesting time, as you mentioned, with sort of budget constraints this year. Not sure what's happening with the federal government, but is there federal funding that the sheriffs receive that would be imperiled if there is a freeze on the federal level?
Sheriff Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator, for the question. And the answer to that question is, frankly, I don't know. I can't speak for all 87 sheriffs on that topic because how we conduct business varies across the state.
Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that answer. But there may be some counties or agencies that are receiving some sort of grants or other federal funding, maybe not all of them, but you know if there are some agencies that do receive some federal funding.
Was that a question, Senator Westland? Sheriff Cameron.
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you. What I can say locally in my own county, I can't speak to what other counties are doing, is that there are federal funds coming to the county and that our team is currently evaluating where that's at and the extent to which we are impacted by executive orders. And so I honestly don't have, and I wish I did, but I don't have a good answer for you as I sit here today.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sheriff Cameron, you talked about capacity and the need for these individuals who have been seen by a doctor and found to be mentally challenged. And I'm just wondering how Minnesota compares to other states in meeting the guidelines to meet the needs of these individuals that you have in your custody or others. You've mentioned the days that were so long in different sheriff guidelines. I'm just wondering if you have any background on other states that are in similar situation or have been able to increase their capacity for these individuals. Thank you.
Sheriff Cameron.
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you for that question. And I'm not prepared to provide any data to that specifically. What I can tell you from conversations that we have had with sheriffs from other states, I don't believe that Minnesota is alone in trying to find a solution to this problem. The extent to how long they stay in other jails outside of Minnesota, I can't speak to that. But I am aware that mental health and those who are justice involved is problematic across the nation.
Thank you.
Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this is kind of a statement and a question. Sheriff Cameron, as Senator Westland was just alluding to, that there is a federal freeze on some grants. We don't actually know what they are yet. As far as I understand, they rescinded the memo on what they had listed, so I'm assuming that means we really have no idea what their freeze is. Do you know at this time of anything that is frozen for federal funds on any of the sheriff-related monetary stuff, grants-wise?
Sheriff Cameron.
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you for the question. Again, this target is moving very quickly, and I have just learned something about it from you today. Everything I knew about it, I learned last night reading the newspaper. And so I'm just trying to get caught up here.
Any further questions? Senator Liskey.
So I'll just follow up with that comment. So basically what I'm hearing from you and what I'm hearing all day today is that we actually don't know that this grant freeze has any effect on the state of Minnesota at this time because we have yet to see what actually might be frozen. So I'd just like to clarify that for everybody that keeps asking that same question in every committee so far.
Any further questions? Hearing none. Sheriff, thanks for coming. Simple request, could you put the items you brought up and mail them to our office sometime in the next week or two?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Senate File
Mr. Chairman?
730, Senator Kreun. Oh, Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, while Senator Kreun is approaching, just to follow up, if I may, to Senator Liskey's comment, I'm sure that you and the other GOP members of this committee will join the DFL members in trying to figure out how to budget in an age of great uncertainty about what federal money may or may not be forthcoming to our area of the budget. Since there's a court that said the executive order was unlawful, there's some sort of a rescission memo going on, and there are a lot of apparently Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security recipients who have already had their money disrupted as a result of the original order. It's going to be awfully hard for us in the next several months to figure out how to budget for the state for the next 2 years if we don't have some clarity on that question. So I'm sure we'll all be watching that with great interest and trying to approach that as best we can collectively.
Senator Latz, we're all in the same boat. I was listening to a White House press briefing, and they said Social Security, Medicare, and the other one that you talked about was not included in their intention, and that was this morning. So apparently they're trying to define their message. And we certainly have ideas on how to balance this budget by the end of May, too. So we'll all have a chance. Thank you. Senator Kreun, you're back.
Chair Limmer, can I speak to that too?
I really need to
I know.
get moving.
Just 2 seconds.
Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Senator Latz about the Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security issues and freezes, it was unrelated to the executive order. It was an error that was done this morning. And so whilst the media was chomping at the bit to tie the two together, they are not tied together. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
We can go back and forth all day, Senator Latz and Senator Liskey.
And-
I would prefer to get on to the business of our committee.
Well, so would I, but just to note, apparently the memo was rescinded, but not the freeze. That's the word most recently. So there's a freeze out there somehow of unknown application. And hopefully we'll get some clarification from the White House before our budget expires June 30th.
All shall be revealed. Senator Kreun,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for.
760, 730.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to present Senate File 730, which is about the Minnesota Data Practices Act. And the purpose of the Minnesota Data Practices Act is to protect the right of the public to know what the government is doing. This has long been our posture here in Minnesota. We believe in government transparency here in Minnesota. We believe in checks and balances. We believe in government integrity and accountability. And even when our government is not acting with integrity and accountability, we still expect that from our government. When it comes to transparency of government data, there are, of course, exceptions and competing considerations that must be balanced. But transparency is our default position and should remain our default position. The burden of proof should be on the party arguing that government data should be kept secret, not on the other party arguing that it should be made public. We are here today, and Senate File 730 is about a court case. My bill is quite simple, just 2 words added to the statute to clear up any confusion about the purpose of that statute. Prior to 2022, Mr. Chair, all of the Minnesota Attorney Generals had considered that data that was not on individuals was public unless it fell into another classification. But the Minnesota Supreme Court decision of Energy Policy Advocates versus Ellison changed that. In a split 4-3 court decision, the majority came to what I would consider rather an absurd conclusion that the legislature used the word individuals in section 13.65 to cover data that was not on individuals. This bill, Senate File 730, would return section 13.65 to its prior effect, returning the Office of Attorney General data that had been presumptively public for over 40 years to its previous public classification. So this bill simply fixes that court case and restores things to the way that they had been operating for decades before that decision. My bill's not getting at anything else. It does not mean that data on corporations or non-individual entities automatically becomes public. If another data classification exists, it will still be protected. And quite frankly, Mr. Chair, this should not be a partisan issue. Good policy is good policy, regardless of the individual that currently holds the office of the Attorney General. And my bill is just trying to restore the status quo back to sunlight and transparency. Because of this court decision, now data involving corporations, data files regarding policy matters do not have to be released to the public, even if they don't contain any information about individuals. For example, if the Attorney General's office accepted money from an outside interest group to litigate a case, how would the public know whether or not that interest group is guiding the Attorney General's policy? Were non-taxpayer dollars directed to the Attorney General's office to influence the office to do something or to not do something? And there's a myriad of other examples here that the public just isn't going to be able to get at under the current status quo after the court decision. And these are questions that the people of Minnesota have an absolute right to the answers. So this means that more and more information is being hidden by the Attorney General on a variety of issues and policies. And because we do not have access to this information, we can kind of only speculate as to what they are withholding. And I would note the Attorney General did submit a letter in response to this, and in that letter, he gives us an idea of what they might be withholding. An example he gives us is that if a nonprofit corporation is aware of fraud, they will not risk filing a complaint because there would be a quote-unquote chilling effect on the nonprofit from even filing the report for fear of being identified. But Mr. Chair, I would submit that the Office of Attorney General's decision to withhold all of its inactive investigation data will mean that data underlying numerous high-profile Office of Attorney General investigations, including ongoing fraud cases such as Feeding Our Future, as well as other multiple inquiries, will be subject to withholding once these cases are closed. I would argue that this means we literally now have no idea what kind of fraud has been occurring and reported, and whether this Attorney General has just decided to sweep it under the rug. When it comes to government transparency, Minnesota used to be trust but verify, but the Attorney General seems to be saying now that it's none of your business. Minnesotans absolutely have a right to this information and to hold our government officials accountable. Minnesotans should be given the opportunity to understand how their Attorney General office operates, regardless of who holds that position and regardless of their party affiliation. This is a good government bill, Mr. Chair. And with me to testify today is Don Gemberling on behalf of Minnesotans for Open Government, which is formerly known as the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information, or as people on this committee would probably know it best as MINCOGI. And also Rich Neumeister has submitted a letter, and I believe he will be testifying here at the table as well.
Thank you, Senator Kreun. Would Mr. Gemberling and Mr. Neumeister approach and come to the testifying table? Senator
Mr. Chair,
Westland.
I just have a quick procedural question. Are we planning to lay this over, or are we voting on the bill? Do you know?
We will decide that after the discussion.
Okay. Gotcha.
Whichever of you would want to go first, I'll let you fight it out.
Mr. Chairman, I understand I'm going first.
All right. Please identify yourself for the record. Welcome back to the Judiciary Committee.
Mr. Chairpersons, I think, and members of the committee, my name is Don Gemberling. I'm a member of the board of what we now call Minnesotans for Open Government. I've been a member of the board ever since I retired from state service, where I spent 29 years working with people like you, trying to formulate good, nonpartisan policy on information issues, okay? You have written testimony from another member of the board, Matt Ealing. It's very extensive. It's got lots of examples. My purpose here is to kind of pull things together, give you a little historical perspective, that kind of thing, okay? So I'm going to talk about how we got here and why Senator Lerner's bill is important, and it's very important, okay? Beginning in 1974, Minnesota adopted the Data Privacy Act. We were the first place in the country to do that, by the way. In that act, this legislature has always treated data about people, and in the history thereafter, differently than data on institutions like corporations and the government itself. Data that's not about people gets less protection in our Data Practices Act than data on people. In 1979, the legislature took the Data Privacy Act and turned it into our functional equivalent of our Freedom of Information Act, okay? And the entire basis for that statute is a presumption that all government data, which is very, very broadly defined, are presumed to be public unless the legislature says otherwise, okay? You clearly wanted to demonstrate control over these issues. To make that work, the legislature created a very elaborate data classification system. In Matt's submission, you'll see there's a matrix that explains all that. I won't go into that. But classifications of data, which determine who gets access to data, vary depending upon whether the data are about people or they're about institutions. And the Data Practices Act and its various requirements then pulls all that together based on how the data are classified. So for example, if the government has data about me as an individual, I have certain rights to get access to that data, okay? That's spelled out in the statute. To function in this new world in which essentially you said at some point to the entire state of Minnesota and all of its political subdivisions, from a date in the future, everything's going to be public. To make that transition, the legislature created a system by which the Department of Administration could approve what were called emergency classifications of data. There was typically bureaucrats, we had an application process, okay? And the commissioner could then, based on what was submitted to the department, either approve or disapprove those applications. In response, we had lots and lots of applications, okay? Like not thousands, but hundreds. And my job in those days was to be part of the process of reviewing those applications and making recommendations to the boss. In this particular instance, by an application by the Attorney General is how Section 13.65 of the statute, which this bill attempts to amend, came into existence. At the time the Attorney General applied for the emergency classification, they wanted all data as described in what is now 1365 to be not public, and I mean all data. We then entered into a negotiation with the Attorney General's office pointing out that, stuff about how the government does its work and not necessarily data about people probably ought to be public. And in 1981, actually, when this discussion occurred, the Attorney General agreed with us. So what was approved by the Commissioner of Administration and what became Section 13.65 was language that says all of the things listed in that section are presumed to be, to the extent that they're data on individuals, they're private, they're not public. If they're data about institutions or the office itself, they're not subject to being private, they're subject to the presumption that all government data are public. So, for the next, frankly, most of 40 years, hardly anything ever happened, okay? I was trying to think of large controversies involving the Attorney General's data over those years, and I've had trouble coming up with any of those. However, in 1994, one of the most charming people I ever had the occasion to deal with, a guy named Archie Anderson, if you can think of a more Minnesota name than that, who was chairman of something called Minnesotans for Smokers' Rights, okay? He went to the Attorney General's office and asked for a variety of data about what the Attorney General was doing with some of the money that was ordered in the lawsuit, because at that time there was a settlement of the lawsuit. And for a lot of the data, Mr. Anderson was told either it didn't exist or he couldn't have access to it because of the language in Section 13.69. Mr. Anderson then asked the Commissioner of Administration, under the authority given to the Commissioner in the early 90s, for an opinion as to whether or not we thought the Attorney General was taking a correct position. And what that opinion said is, if the data doesn't exist, well, there's no data for the Data Practices Act to work on. However, to the extent that Mr. Anderson asked for correspondence, discussions, notes, whatever, with institutions, corporations, private nonprofits, because of the language in 1365, as we were interpreting then, those data would be public, okay? Consistent with what we'd always said, okay? In response to that, the Attorney General did not like that answer. I got to tell you, the guy who called me from the AG's office wasn't real polite, but that's all right. I'm a big guy. I can handle things. And so in response to that, they went to the House and asked for an amendment to the Data Practices Act, okay? And that amendment essentially would have added the words non-public to the classification statement. And after some discussion in the House, that amendment was not adopted, okay? So then we went back essentially to not a heck of a lot happening, okay? Eventually, however, help me, Senator,
The name of the case?
Yeah, no,
Energy Policy Advocates.
Yeah, policy advocates
Mr. Gay.
asked for data from the Attorney General's office. One of the things I found very troubling in the record of the case was they made that request, which is a legitimate request under the Data Practices Act, and they got no response whatsoever from the Attorney General, okay? Now, I deal with people, citizens, even though I'm retired all the time. And the idea that the chief law enforcement officer of the state of Minnesota would not have at least the courtesy, not to mention abiding with the law, which is to say, you can't have that data, but there was no response whatsoever, okay? So the case worked its way through the case courts. It eventually got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held, as the Senator has indicated, that essentially all of the data that's described in section 13.65, which means essentially virtually all of the data maintained by the Attorney General is not available to the public. It's important at this point to understand the Attorney General plays a dual role in our system of government. He's both the chief law enforcement officer of the state of Minnesota, but he's also the administrative head of one of the state's most powerful constitutional officers. He's running an office. He's got people. He makes plans. He comes up with initiatives. As the chief legal officer, much of the Attorney General's data is already protected by a variety of statutes. That includes Section 1339, which is the Civil Investigative Data section of the Data Privacy Act. It includes Section 13.393, which is essentially the public lawyer's work product provision of the Data Privacy Act. It includes Section 1382 of the criminal data provisions of the Data Privacy Act. And when all else fails, the Attorney General, as an attorney, can also claim attorney-client privilege. So that covers a whole lot of data. However, in the case of the civil investigative data, because of language in 1365, he also has more protection for his civil investigative data than any other attorney in the state of Minnesota. Because for most attorneys, inactive civil investigative data is public. So referencing some of the things that the Senator said, if you really wonder why a given attorney did what they did in an investigation, in the case of all attorneys but the AG, you can go look at the inactive investigative data and find out why what happened. But that's not the case with the AG staff data. So because of the decision of the Supreme Court, it also protects all kinds of data that's associated with the role of the Attorney General as the chief administrative officer of one of the most powerful state government offices. Section 1365, subdivision 1B, says basically that any data about administrative or policy matters under the Supreme Court's interpretation is not public, okay? And I want you to think about that for a while. Number one, those terms are not defined. So they have their normal and ordinary meaning. So what is an administrative matter? What is a policy matter? And I would suspect, given the way the government tends to do things, they will have very, very expansive definitions, okay? So, in essence, in practical terms, the Attorney General can keep data, more data secret than any other public official in Minnesota under the interpretation by the Supreme Court, okay? And for those of us who really are kind of good government types, that just doesn't seem to fit very well. The Senator's bill, very simple bill, would correct that problem, okay? We support its passage, and we feel very strongly about this, as you can probably tell. When I read the Supreme Court decision, I kept going, how did they get there? And then I read Justice Thiessen's dissent, in which he described the result, frankly, as Orwellian, okay, in its logic. And I gotta tell you, I'm an old Orwell guy. That's part of the reason I always did what I did, because I majored in history, which by the way, didn't help me get a job, but that's all right. But but so important to understand the importance of language, okay? And so now we have a situation in which you have some data that's not about an individual, but we will treat it as if it were, which is what the Supreme Court did. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I support, thanks for listening to me. So.
I think we'll hold questions until after Mr. Newmeister, and then we can get into discussion. Mr. Newmeister, I almost called you Senator Newmeister, but
Mr. Co-Chair, you're not one of the first of the senators that have done that over the decades. Mr. Chair, chairs, and members of the committee, my name is Rich Newmeister. I am an open government and privacy advocate for decades, and it's always nice to come here to this room 15, which is very strongly part of my legislative DNA, and I've shared that historically with you, and so coming back here to make some comments. This bill is an important bill to become a law, or some variation of it, because what the decision did is basically took the AG's argument, hey, let's put a square peg in a round hole and expand the issue of definition of individuals and give us the opportunity to make it all secret. And secret is not my words. If you read the Thiessen dissent, he mentions this makes data secret that used to be public. That's very clear. And it's very clear to me as someone who has dealt with 5 attorney generals. I met Doug Head on a high school thing, but I wasn't involved on policy issues back then. In 1986, when the Scott County Kathy Morris episode came, the AG decided to do an expansive thing on child abuse legislation. I was interested to make sure certain things about individuals were kept either private or had due process rights or all that. I asked Norm Coleman and the AG's office for data about their policy thing, which would be under 1B, if you look at 1365. I got it. In 1988, and with Mr. Chairman, with Senator Latz, Co-Chair Latz, being a member of the Attorney General's staff, he probably remembers people's names like Jim Early, Bill Cupp, who in 1988 wanted to do a big change about wiretaps. I then asked their office for inactive investigative data about their use of wiretaps. And I got some data, like the search warrants and other kinds of things in some cases. I even also asked, what are the protocols or procedures that you make a decision about to do wiretaps? I got that. That helped me working with you from some of your former colleagues on a bipartisan view to have some wiretap language. In 1993, as you may know, the AG's office has a very strong consumer complaint office. They get many complaints and many dynamics of what people are feeling out there. Because I was interested in how consumer reports are doing, or consumer credit, I asked for, do you have any information that can give me an idea, what are some of the trends in their consumer? I got that. That would not be available under this interpretation. And at the same time, I worked with Doug Blanke, who some people may know, who was head of the consumer division. I worked with Senators Miriam and Tommy Rukavina on a consumer credit language, which you'll see in 13C or D, I forget what it was, where it can be used. And there have been other numerous attempts where I got information from the AG's office that would be considered either policy matters or administrative kinds of things on entities or just general discussion that would not be available. A recent conversation I had with a reporter about a memoranda done by Scott Halderman of the AG's office about an investigation of Officer Anthony Dean. This was about a shooting, an officer-involved shooting. The charging memo was public in 2021 when asked. The way the interpretation is that more than likely that would not be public. Now, if you take a look in the record, which is, I think, very important, that was given to you by Matt Elling, if you look on page 14, you'll see there's an interesting little discussion about wanting to get information about investigative data after a case becomes inactive. And you'll see very clearly that Michael McSherry says, you're not going to get it anymore, which you used to get, inactive civil investigative data. And because of the energy policy advocates. You will also see on page 3 a little footnote. It's about an opinion, again, that the Office of Administration did. It was done in 2004, where Doug Eiton, I think that's his name, he was one of the chief or deputy chiefs or whatever of the Attorney General's office, said, hey, if we would have had the data, we would have given it to you. It was information about correspondence on some things. And if you go look at that opinion, now that would not be public based on the interpretation of this law. In terms of the Attorney General's letter, I just want to address a couple things, because historically, I think this is important.
Mr. Newmeister, hold on one second. The references that Mr. Newmeister is making is in your packets. That last reference was from Matt Ealing from the Minnesotans for Open Government, and he just made reference to a letter from the Minnesota Attorney General, which is also in your packets. Go ahead, Mr. Newmeister.
I just want to tackle one of the discussions about what they call deliberative process. It's important to note that in the history of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, the legislature continuously, over all my decades, have refused a deliberative process as broad as the Attorney General says he has. And they have not even given that to county attorneys, city attorneys. Again, they can have the deliberative process under attorney-client privilege, under other kinds of things that are recognized with work product, but in general kinds of discussion that has never been recognized. There's a difference between the Federal Freedom of Information Act and also the Chapter 13. And then on a final note, I have worked bipartisanly for open government for almost 50 years in this building. I started small. I started asking questions. I worked with my senator, Bill McCutcheon. And the first year, he became a Democrat. He was always caucusing on the conservative side. And continue to this day, I do this for free. This decision needs to be overturned, or some variation has to change, because as the Attorney General, historically that I've seen, whether it be with Hatch, whether it be with Swanson, I can go on, have gotten more powers, more ability to intertwine with our lives in Minnesota. And it's incumbent upon us and policymakers to know in small areas, which this bill and which has always been public, to continue. And so, Mr. Chairman and Chair and members of the committee, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the detail. Let's do some things that we all can work on in a very positive way. So, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I thank you for your time, and I thank you for listening to what I have to say. And my testimony is very direct in detail on that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Newmeister. We'll open it up for discussion. I did want to point out that we have 2 letters from Richard Hodson, attorney at law, on this issue. It seems like he's got a running discussion back and forth with the Attorney General, which also has included a response to Mr. Hodson, as well as a cover letter from the Attorney General. So let's open it up for discussion. Sir Latz.
Mr. Chairman, first I'll just note, I go back as far as Doug Head as well, but I was 3 years old, and Doug Head was on the ticket that became Attorney General when my dad was defeated in the DFL primary for Attorney General in 1966. And Doug Head, by the way, was an excellent Attorney General, and his wife Martha Head later became our Met Council representative. So a family of great public service. Is there anyone here from the Attorney General's office?
Is there anyone from the Attorney General's office that wishes to give testimony?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz.
I read the letter from the Attorney General's office. I just glanced through all the materials that we have in our packet today. I've read portions of Justice Thiessen's dissent. And it seems that it really doesn't matter what the provenance of the lawsuit was here, having to do originally with some attorneys that might have been funded or were funded from an outside source doing work in the Attorney General's office on certain subject areas. That's really not the question that's before us now. The question that's before us now is whether the statute, as I see it, is whether the statute is well-written and needs amendments in light of the recent Supreme Court decision. Apparently, the way the statute is written has engendered a number of interpretations, all of which were consistent until the Supreme Court's decision. Early on, 1977 Department of Administration interpretation, then a 1994 Department of Administration opinion on this statute, and now a closely divided Supreme Court reaching where 7 of our brightest lawyers in the state have reached opposite conclusions, or at least 2 groups of them reached opposite conclusions about what the statute means. And even in the dissent, a reading that is reaches the same conclusion as previous interpretations, but which is itself has to go through quite a cycle to reach that conclusion, only because the statute seems to be written poorly. I think it was not an issue of interpretation or discussion for many, many years, because there seemed to be a consensus as to what it meant, and it was implemented with that understanding. But that understanding changed, or at least as it was implemented by the Attorney General's office. So I've got a bit of a concern about making a short reversal of the Supreme Court's decision with a couple of word changes in the statute, but leaving a statute in place that seems to have some internal inconsistencies, as Matt Edling used in his correspondence to this committee. There's an internal logic that is disrupted by the Supreme Court's decision, but also I think that is set up by this particular section of statute 13.65, which it says declares as private data on individuals a whole bunch of categories that will include both data on individuals and data not on individuals, which everywhere else in the Data Practices Act is categorized as not public. I mean, the term private refers specifically to individual data. The term not public refers to other categories of data, which is not public. So I guess I do have a question that might set this up for some further conversation, but in reading the Attorney General's office memorandum, they seem to feel pretty vigorously that the data that is not public that they have declared or determined to be not public should remain private or not public data. I'm not entirely clear on all the scope of what data is covered by each provision in the data practices section here, 0.65. I'd like to know more about that before I pass a bill that would declare all of it public, because the implications are pretty substantial. And I default that government data should be public data, but not all government data should be public data, because there are other interests involved. So I guess I would ask our testifiers, or our chief author, if they believe there's anything listed in 13.65 that ought to be, or covered by 13.65, that ought to remain private.
Would any testifier wish to answer that question? Perhaps Mr. Gemmerling?
Mr. Chair, I'll just briefly,
Senator Kreun?
thank you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Latz. I will defer to the testifiers, but my initial comments would be, I don't, in one sense, yes, this bill would be declaring all of it public, but only going back a couple of years. I mean, prior to this decision, it was public. And so really, it's not that this bill, and I'm not saying you said this, but I'm just trying to set the table that this bill is not making some profound change, making all of this data public, except as it's been interpreted since this court decision 2 years ago. And so for 40-plus years, this was public. And so I would view it more as restoring the status quo. And then if we want to have a conversation about whether or not all of this data that has been deemed public for more than 40 years should not be public, then we could have that discussion at that point. And then the Attorney General would be the person at this table testifying as to, and meeting their burden of proof as to why they think data that was considered public for over 40 years should no longer be public. So I just wanted to set the table with that remark and see if my testifiers have anything else to add.
Mr. Gemmerling?
Mr. Chairman, I was struck in part by the Attorney General's letter in paragraph 2, where it says that section 13.65 reflects a careful balancing of competing goals. My problem with that statement is I don't know where that balancing occurred, okay? In response to Senator Latt's comment about statute was written poorly, the language in 1365 is word for word the language that was sent to the Department of Administration by the Attorney General's office when it described what data it wanted to be classified as not public. If you go back, and I can't remember if that, I don't think the temporary class or the emergency classification is in your packet, but it's available from the Department of Administration. Because part of what I did when this started was I went back to look to see whether or not we reflected what the AG wanted, okay? So the AG wrote that language, okay? Now, to understand, when the legislature said everything's going to be public at a date certain, we got hundreds of emergency classification applications. We ended up packaging them into a very large bill. Doesn't compare at all to the budget bills you people have been producing, but it was a very large bill, okay? And it received fairly decent discussion, but frankly, I do not remember a careful balancing of competing goals when the Attorney General's provision was debated. Frankly, you all agreed, sort of, those, none of you are here now, were here then, that, you had a lot of work to do. The whole idea was to get stuff on the books, so a bunch of stuff that's really sensitive shouldn't become public, so the bill moved along, okay? The other thing I was struck by in the Attorney General's letter is there's no detailed discussion of all of the bad things that are going to happen if this data continues to be public, okay? In contrast to that, repeating what's been said here, and I'll be one of the people who repeats it, most of these data were public for 40-plus years. And only one time that I remember, because somebody asked, frankly, what I think the Attorney General thought were kind of embarrassing questions about what was being done with the money from the smoking settlement, did somebody think it was important enough to come to you and ask for a change? And by you, I mean the legislature at that time. And that request was rejected after discussion, okay? So are there things in response to the question that should probably be not public that the Attorney General has? That could very well be, part of your history. Keep in mind, this is the Real Data Practices Act. You've passed endless language making stuff not public. It's the way you set it up, the process in the future. However, I cannot ever agree to the fact that all administrative, not defined, and policy activities of the Attorney General's office ought to be not public, which is a exclusion that nobody else in the state of Minnesota has. Not even the governor has that kind of privilege. The AG's letter references the deliberative process privilege in the Freedom of Information Act. Part of the reason we have the statute we have is by the time you began considering these issues, there had been about roughly 7, 8 years of experience with the Freedom of Information Act. And the media in particular, based on that experience, we're not going to advocate for you or with you to have a statute that looked like the Freedom of Information Act, okay? That's part of our history. And that's not the approach you took. You just didn't go there. The deliberative process, and I'm not an expert on the Freedom of Information Act, but I know something about it. The deliberative process privilege in the Freedom of Information Act essentially eats all accountability for the federal government. It just eats it up, okay? Because every time you want to go to a federal agency and say, well, let's use today's example. How did you decide to make a decision about cutting off grants to states and other people of federal money? You know what the answer to that question is going to be? We cannot tell you how we reached that decision because that's part of the deliberative process exception of the Freedom of Information Act. That's the way it works. Now, you know, part of the joy of that is whoever is empowered can just say, well, we're not going to interpret the statute that way. And if they do that, then fine. But that isn't, history will tell you that's not what they do, okay? It's just not. Hope that answered the questions.
Senator Westland,
Did you want, Mr. Chair,
hold on that.
Mr. Newmeister wanted to answer Senator Latz's question.
Senator Latz, would you mind if Mr. Newmeister chip in?
I was hoping to get a very tightly focused response, if I might, to this. And then before we wrap up, I'll have a
Mr. Chair.
recommendation for how we proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, that I was going to say.
Mr. Newmeister.
Mr. Chair, Chair Latz, or Co-Chair Latz, I think one of the important aspects is that inactive investigative data should be public, like every entity, because that's where people who are, I've been talking with environmentalists. They want to know what the AG is doing in these suits. Why it turned out this way, how come, or whatever. People go to the inactive investigative data, which is generally public with privacy protections. And as you know, this decision, they don't have to go with 1339 anymore. In one of the examples with the AG, they've talked about, well, there might be some trade secrets or something. Well, we have a statute in 1337 that says that data is not available to the public. I think, Mr. Chairman, and one of the things that you have to think as we discuss this, as the discussion goes on, sometimes agencies don't want to go through the data to redact the things that are necessary. So what they sometimes just want to do is, let's make it all not available to the public. Whether or not that's the sense of the AG, I don't know. But Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz asked a good question. We got to hear from the AG too, so he can take questions of you as policymakers and of the public. So Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz, that's my short answer.
Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, I want to hear what Senator Westland has to say, but before we
Senator Westland.
decide how to go, if you'd be willing to come back to me, I've got a thought on how to proceed.
We are kind of running out of time for the room.
I shall be brief. Mr. Chair, you laugh.
Well,
Mr.
Senator Westland, I've been here for a while, and I wish I had $1 for every time someone would say, I'll be brief.
I stand by my word.
All right. We'll
So,
hold you to it.
Mr. Chair and Senator Kreun, I guess this sort of begs the question, is, I've heard comments that the AG should be here, but my question really is, Have you worked with the AG's office and staff as stakeholders and people who are impacted by this to discuss your bill and to discuss if there is language that, as Senator Lass has suggested, this is maybe an unclear statute? Have you worked with them to try to come up with something that meets the objectives that you seem to be attempting to reach, but also meets their objective of trying to continue to protect data that should be protected?
Senator Kreun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Westland. I have not spoken directly with the Attorney General's office about this issue. I note their absence here is peculiar. I also would note that this bill has been introduced in the last session and even, I believe, had some discussion on the floor in the other body. It did not get a hearing in this body. And so, and there's been lots of activity, an opportunity for the Attorney General to reach out to me as the chief author last year or this year. I've not heard from them. This is obviously a very important matter. And, all we get is a letter. And the thing I want to really focus on here is kind of the default nature of the transparency. And I'm not claiming to be an expert in all of the things that the Attorney General does, but to me, the burden of proof should be on them, like any other executive or agency that would come here to justify why certain things should be exempt or accepted from being public. And as far as I know, the Attorney General's office has not been willing to engage in that conversation because they have this court ruling that says they don't have to effectively. So, perhaps that could be a discussion that I absolutely would be willing to have if they chose to do that.
Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Kreun. I am a freshman just as you are, but my experience has been that when I'm putting forward a bill, I talk to all the stakeholders. And if I'm trying to put forward a bill that's changing policy, I want to hear from the stakeholders so that we can come to some sort of meeting of the minds. And I'm going to assume that that process might have been fruitful. I can say to the chair and Chair Latz that, if we're going to vote on this today, I'm a no vote, but if we're going to lay it over and have further discussions, I think that's a great idea. But I think it's imperative for us as bill authors to be reaching out to stakeholders also and not just assuming, well, they haven't come and talked to me. That isn't always the best way to make policy or laws, and I think it shows kind of a cantankerous approach to the AG rather than looking at them as a potential partner in creating law that everybody can agree to.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Kreun.
I did read 55 pages of a legal opinion that set forth their positions very clearly and their posture towards this subject. And I think their absence from this room right now speaks volumes.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Westland, I wanted to remind you that you'd be brief.
Yep, I have been very brief and very pointed, Mr. Chair. The way we resolve conflicts is by talking to people. That's how we do things.
To the new members, I just wanted to welcome you to the exciting world of data privacy. And this is, believe me, more simple than some of the other things we get into. So we have a decision to decide what path are we going to take. We're at that point that we have to leave the room. Senator Latz, did you want to give any comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you coming back to me. I know what's been done for 40 years, and then I know what's been done for the last 2 years. And quite honestly, if the only decision point where it's been done that way for 40 years, so we don't need to change it, then every bill that's been introduced in the legislature this year and in years past would be ruled out of any value whatsoever, because every bill proposes a change, and however long it's been done in the past. I'm reluctant to make a decision today about what the right path is going forward. I think we have a public policy decision to make here, not just a reversal of a Supreme Court decision. to fix a statute that was clearly ambiguously written in the first place in a manner inconsistent with the entire construct of the Data Practices Act, and whether it's been that way since it was proposed in that language by the Attorney General's office 40 years ago or whenever it was. I think we, as a body here, have an obligation to try to do what's right for public policy going forward with regard to what is public, what is not public, whether it's characterized as private data on individuals or not. And I'm not comfortable just doing a blanket, bill today, sending it onto the floor because it won't have any other stops, and then having a further discussion on the Senate floor about the nuances of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, which I think none of us would want to have to sit through. So my request, Mr. Chairman, my suggestion is that you lay this over so that we have an opportunity to have a more detailed conversation about that. I'd want to get the Attorney General's office in and ask them what portions of this that are covered do they really think should be private or not public, and why? I'd want to maybe get a more specific answer from our testifiers and others who have submitted material for our packets to that same question. And I'd want to hear the reasons to justify that. And then I think we can come up maybe with a statute that's better written and more precise. Maybe some of these categories should be handled one way. Maybe each of the subsections in .65 ought to be handled in several different ways, depending on what's in that subsection. So that would be my request, Mr. Chairman. I will commit that if it is laid over, that we will bring it back for further conversation. I'm not trying to stop the bill. I'm trying to fashion a public policy going forward that works. And if it's the desire of the chair to go to a vote on the up or down on the bill today, I'll be a no vote so that it'll be around later maybe to talk about. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Let me make a quick comment. I listened carefully, Senator Latz, to your comments, especially about recognizing the fact that this policy prior to the decision has been in our statute books for 40 years. Perhaps we should study a little bit more of why it's been on the books for 40 years. We had a hint of that in the testimony. And as I look at it, we do know that laws are subject to reform. I'm getting a sense that the committee may not be comfortable with making a decision today. You've held out an olive branch, Senator Latz, to work with the author. I hope I'm characterizing your comments correctly. And that I think in this particular bill, we should rely on a little more discussion off campus a little bit and see if we could come to terms. That would be a bill that all of us could be proud to support. Senator Kreun, can I get a comment from you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A comment as to what I would like to see done?
Yes, Senator. I'm suggesting that the bill may need more discussion to get support out of a 50-50 committee.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we could withdraw it or take Senator Latz's olive branch, as you called it. It really makes no difference to me. I think the importance of this hearing and this bill being heard when it is to get this bill heard and to get people like my testifiers up here to explain to the public what is going on. And if there was assurance that we could get a hearing later on this year, perhaps there would have been more time to reach out to the Attorney General and force them into this conversation, so to speak, knowing that that was going to be the case. But of course, as things are, this was the opportunity today to bring this very important issue to the public. And that's what I did, and I think we'll be better off for doing that. And so, of course, I'm willing to work with the Attorney General if they're serious about looking at this and working with us. And that remains to be seen. But I'm certainly willing to work with Senator Latz and come up with some ideas on perhaps some alternatives to get to place that not only resolves the statutory interpretation problem of the court. I think I fully agree with you there. That's one problem, but also to make sure that we get more transparency to the Attorney General's office, and I'm certainly willing to do that.
Senator Latz, could you use your influence to encourage someone from the Attorney General's office to come and give testimony at our committee?
Mr. Chairman, I will invite the Attorney General's office to a meeting to have conversation prior to any further committee hearing, along with other stakeholders, to share with us more detail about their position on these and why some things should or should not be public. And I will invite other stakeholders and the chief author and any other members of the Senate who wish to be involved in those conversations to join us as well.
Well, it's a start, Senator Latz. Hearing discussion coming to a conclusion, I would lay the bill over. Pardon me. Oh, Senator Westrom, did you have a last minute comment? No. Okay. The bill is laid over. There's no further action on our agenda at this time. The meeting is adjourned.